So last minute bathroom break, do it now or forever hold your bladder. No. Thanks, bro. I appreciate it.
Don't wait for us to be weak,
Is this the 11th? Wow.
And then, okay, so welcome to the 12th annual Students for a Democratic Society Convention. Ambitious So thank you very much for being present, especially the local hosts, Student Activist Network in Santa Barbara. So before we really start, and I know that we're 30 minutes late. I'm sorry. We'll roll with it. Everyone just give your presentations to the fullest. Make sure you all have a program. Make sure that you all know where to find the schedule, which is the left side of the fourth page. So page 4. And then before I kind of, open up with the politics of the convention, let's just talk very briefly about the fact that we do have a code of conduct, which is in the program as well. First page. On the first page. Thanks, Della. Okay. So very quickly, be aware of who's speaking, for how long and how often. We want to encourage facilitators to use a weighted stack. Make sure if people aren't participating, you call on people who have their hands up. If some people have been talking too much, if you're leading a workshop, you make sure to promote people who haven't been speaking much. Make sure that you are aware of who's representing your group. No unsightly behavior allowed. No sexual harassment. No slurs. No racist behavior. No misconduct. Be aware of behaviors and language. If you look at all the name tags around you, you'll see people have specified, or some people have specified pronouns. Please be respectful. We have a lot of genderqueer, non-binary folks, and we want to, make sure we are as, progressive as possible and as accommodating as possible. Accommodating is not even the right word. Make sure we behave like decent human beings. No tolerance for xenophobic, homophobic behaviors, and then be respectful of the hosting organizations and facilities. Abide by the rules outlined for certain spaces. If you make a mess, clean it up. If you see a mess and you did not make that mess, kindly clean it up. And then the Saturday social tonight is not a frat party. You can drink, you can let loose, but make sure you're responsible. We do have to wake up early tomorrow to decide what we as National SES are going to do tomorrow morning. Yeah. And you don't want to be hungover for that. People will be able to tell. So, with that said, okay. My name is Chris Carpio, and I'm here from the Tampa Bay Students for a Democratic Society. I'm also representing, as you said, on the National Working Committee calls, just kind of the opening speech for new SES for you all here today. So here goes nothing. Hello, new students for a Democratic Society. Hello, Santa Barbara. Let's hear a round of applause for everyone who made it out here today. Let's hear it for the travelers and the organizers. It certainly wasn't easy for a lot of folks who traveled, flew, and in many cases paid out of their pockets to help their fellow organizers make it here today. I know Houston did, I know Arlington did. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for organizers to spend hours on the phone putting this event together, writing a schedule, raising money, coordinating chapters and speakers. We appreciate your sacrifice. It's not easy for us to fund events like this as students and working people and working students without any corporate sponsors. Let's hear a round of applause for everybody who donated, helped their fellow students pay for travel costs, and traveled here from across the United States. Went through much hardship to be here today. And then finally, I want to give endless praise to the Student Activist Network here at the University of California, Santa Barbara for their tireless and fruitful work put into convening us here today. Without their diligence and creativity, without their resources and their hard work, we would not have the lodging, food, diverse variety of attending political groups, and member tens that we get to enjoy today. So let's give them our final, loudest round of applause. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you. And now before we begin, I want to say a few things about the past few years. 2017 has been a year of intense struggle. Does this work? Almost daily we hear news of U.S. wars, of horrible racist orders from President Trump, intense xenophobia, and a surge in the white nationalist movement. It has been a year of dire need and urgent action. Nobody in my immediate circles before 2016, among my coworkers, my family, my fellow organizers, my classmates, and my friends, seriously thought that a billionaire, as sexist, racist, greedy, and ignorant as Donald Trump would be elected as the U.S. president. This is a man whose claim to fame includes a slogan about firing people. And then, during his campaign in 2016, people became even more skeptical about him as a candidate. After all, it's not like this electoral political system could fail us so badly as to let him win, right? It just can't happen. Surely, even the elite shareholders in Congress would rather concede more money for healthcare, education, welfare than let Trump win. Surely they would come out strong for things people want, like accountability for police, than let Trump become president. But they didn't. So Trump became president. The lines were drawn immediately. The attacks rolled out, swift and brutal. Not only is he racist and sexist, he built his platform on the idea of the supremacy of American capital, on a call for exclusion of foreign peoples, what he calls making America great again. He proudly espoused men's rights, rolling back federal measures to protect LGBTQ people, and gave us a Secretary of State, Betsy DeVos, who wants more voices for frat boys accused of sexual assault. He facilitated mass deportations, restricted legal immigration, did his best to close our doors to Arab and Muslim refugees. He found a voting base among white nationalists and became a symbol for a new alt-right, new neo-Nazi movement, which is already proving dangerous to the progressive forces in the United States. He called for a Muslim ban. He called for a border wall. He ended deferred action for childhood arrivals. He spit in the face of people who are mobilizing for legalization for all. Meanwhile, Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton and former Democratic U.S. President Obama called for tolerance, peace, and civility from angry Americans towards their new president. They called for loyalty. Change, they said, comes slowly, right? Improvements to healthcare and education can come slowly, right? One school at a time, one person at a time. Surely the status quo, the poverty and the incarcerations and the wars of today aren't so bad compared to Trump. They tried to hold our vote hostage. After all, they argued, he's our president, so we have to respect him. But people stood up for themselves and said no. We don't want justice to come slow. The circus of the 2016 election was full of incredible things, but I think the most incredible part of all were the brave shows of resistance. Thousands of people dove into the streets in defiance of the elections, chanting, "Not my president." People dared to make piñatas of Trump and bash them in the head. As for SDS, we protested Trump from the start, as soon as he announced he would be running. In fact, in Santa Barbara alone, after he was inaugurated as president, students held protests overnight, continuously, with 3,000 people in the streets, concluding in the 500-person march through the Santa Barbara Library. High school students walked out onto highways demanding sanctuary campuses. Working people and militant trade unionists recognized they'd have to fight for higher pay and better working conditions on their own, putting their fate into their own hands. In Minneapolis, in Santa Barbara, trade unionists celebrated International Workers' Day, threatened strikes, and students marched in the streets in solidarity. In Boston, at Harvard University and Northeastern University, campus workers in two different places at two different points in time won everything they demanded. Higher pay, premium level health care, better non-discrimination policies, including for gender expression, more sick days, more dignity and pay, bread and roses, and they won it themselves. Big league football players kneeled instead of giving the Pledge of Allegiance to an administration that refuses to hold police officers accountable to mass murdering African American, Latino, Chicano youth. When the first visa holders and immigrants in the wake of the Muslim ban were detained, organizers such as our very own Arab American Action Network speaker, Bassem Kawar, mobilized people to shut down airports, O'Hare, Dulles, John F. Kennedy. When white supremacist fascists like Milo Yiannopoulos came to campus, they were shut down, canceled, thrown out of town by a very organized here from UC Davis. There they are. At UC Berkeley in defiance of Milo's own attempt to come to their campus, not once but twice. When Ben Shapiro rolled into Salt Lake City, he was drowned out by MECHA and Students for Democratic Society at the University of Utah. The Florida Gators protested inside and outside of the event hall, drowning out Richard Spencer with chants of Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
When fascists and neo-Nazis said, "Unite the right" in Charlottesville, anti-fascists said no, and they protested and risked their lives again and again, went to the hospital, went outside to protest again and again, and one of them even includes our very own SCSR at George Mason University. He could not be here for us today, but it also happens to be her birthday tomorrow, so I
Happy birthday to her.
Yeah, happy birthday, Kaylee. When the LAPD killed Jesse Romero, Kendrick McDade, and District Attorney Jackie Lacey failed to prosecute police officers, Central Community Service Organization and Black Lives Matter in Pasadena said, "No justice, no peace." And no racist police. When Governor Abbott said immigrants are criminals and sanctuary cities must go, Christian from the North Texas Dream Team and Progressive Student Union in Arlington said, "Undocumented, unafraid." And it's their current campaign, and they're here to talk to us about it today.
Woo! Yeah!
The real resistance to Trump. It's not in the ballot box. It's not sitting in Congress, twiddling their thumbs and hedging their bets. It's not the hypocrisy of both the Democrats and the Republicans. It's the people in this room. It's the students who protest on our campuses and join forces with working people and oppressed people in our communities.
Amen.
Yes, thank you. Students can be the single spark that lights the prairie fire that burns up everything rotten in this society. By defying this president, by defying the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress who sit idly by while people suffer and enable Nazis and a new social movement in the United States, we'll see a movement for our new system, for our new society, led by working and oppressed people, and we'll see it in our lifetime. And now I want to say, when I say, when immigrants are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up!
When immigrants are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up!
When Arabs are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up!
When Arabs are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up! Fight back!
When working people are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up! Fight back!
When oppressed people are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up! Fight back!
Stand up, fight back!
Stand up! Fight back!
Stand up, fight back!
Stand up! Fight back!
Everyone in the U.S. hear you, stand up, fight back!
Stand up! Fight back!
Thank you very much for coming today. Before we transition into our first plenary, we're going to hear a speech about the radical history of our very own host city, Santa Barbara.
Hello. I want to get started by just taking a minute to acknowledge that we're currently on Chumash land. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mayela Morales, this year's head organizer for the Student Activist Network, She, Her, Hers. So I'm going to give you a little spiel of what we've been about for the past year. Okay, so from hunger strikes to riots to walkouts, students and students of color in particular have mobilized throughout the history of the UC in order to create a more inclusive environment for their communities, demand adequate resources, and hold accountable a university built on the promise to serve all. In 1968, students from the newly formed Black Student Union took over North Hall in response to systemic racism they experienced at the university. Students barricaded the building, which they renamed Malcolm X Hall. Malcolm X Hall, at the time, housed a computer center, which not only held the university's financial information, but contained one of the central nodes for what will later become the internet. VSU threatened to dump water on the computers if their demands were not met. Angela Davis, a member from the Black Panthers, came and spoke during the takeover to show her support. In 1970, the Bank of America branch in Isla Vista was burned to the ground in response to the firing of anthropology professor Bill Allen, growing opposition of the Vietnam War, and increasing police surveillance of students. KCSB, the campus radio station, was shut down by the police temporarily for broadcasting the location of riot police to protesters. Later on, in 1989, a coalition of students went on a hunger strike to fight for the creation of a multicultural center on campus. In return, they were given the Closet, a small, underfunded building. Currently, we have a really nice multicultural center that is actually funded by student fees. It's awesome. If you're a UCSB student, check it out. In 1999, members from El Congreso, UCSB Metro chapter, went on yet another hunger strike for 9 days in order to fight for the preservation of El Centro and the establishment of a Chicana Studies PhD program, the first one in the nation. Despite a still thriving activist scene, comprised of militant students and workers fighting for the communities, a campus comprised of 24,000 students inevitably presents a challenge to organizers. How do we organize all these people, connect them to movements they care about, and build student and worker power? The Student Activist Network was formed just last year to meet these demands. We first collaborated with the Feminasty Guardians by marching 200 students down Del Playa Drive on a Friday night in the rally against rape culture. With ASME Local 3299, we marched 500 students and workers through Davidson Library during J20. We teamed up with Fossil Free UCSB to stage a 4-day sit-in at Cheadle Hall that pressured Chancellor Yang to become the first chancellor in the UC system to endorse the university's full divestment from fossil fuels. 4 other chancellors later on followed suit. Fossil Free UCSB then joined us as we marched to support ASME workers in their contract negotiations with the university during May Day. The Santa Barbara Student Activist Network is determined to continue the struggle for social, environmental, and economic justice, and we are honored to host the 2017 Students for Democratic Society National Convention.
Oh, yes, I'm not using this. But thank you very much, Mayela. That was an excellent introduction, and I did not know that so much was going on. Well, I knew a lot was going on in Santa Barbara, but it was good to hear the details. So next, we are going to transition into our first plenary, since our theme of the convention is about uniting people against kind of the hate and the racism and the wars that President Trump is inflicting on the U.S. today. Our first plenary is going to be specific to that topic, and we have Rosa here from Student Activist Network to lead us into our speaker plenary.
Hi guys, I'm Rose. Full name is Rosalind Onyeka Japanese name, but Rose is just fine. I'm the treasurer and racial justice chair for Student Activist Network here in Santa Barbara. 4th-year student, double majoring in social history, and yeah, that's about me. I'm also low-key terrified of public speaking, so
you're gonna kick ass.
Don't laugh at me if I mess up. So we're gonna have our first plenary, like she said, topic on resisting white supremacy and building the fight against Trump's attacks. Our first speakers will be, sorry if I mess up your names, anyone. So our first speaker will be Basim Kawar. He's an organizer with Arab American Action Network and the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. UCPCN is the lead organizer of the Osama Adad Defense Community. Basim also leads the campaign to take on hate in Chicago. AAAN is a community-based organization that thrives to meet the immediate demands of the community while organizing for long-term change. Also, quick announcement before that, if you're in my social apologies class and you want that extra credit for coming out to this event, sign-up sheets are in the back, posted on the wall.
All right, good morning, folks. How we doing?
Yeah!
Energy. All right, so I'm on 2 hours of sleep, so if I'm mumbling, if I'm talking too fast, just, wave at me, say slow down, take it easy. So today I'm here to talk to you about the organizing of the AAAN, the Arab American Action Network, around the shutdown of O'Hare Airport. Before we get into the organizing, just a couple points worth mentioning here. First is the institutions that Trump is using to increase the attacks on oppressed people are not a new phenomenon. Those were established by new administrations, previous administrations, I mean, and those administrations did exactly the same. Oppress working class people and oppress people in this country. And it's important to also notice that this administration, just like the ones before, continue to empower the ruling class billionaires over ordinary working class people. We see it in policy, we see it in their actions, executive orders, even in their rhetoric. And also the attacks that were launched against our people are not only random or to justify foreign policy, this is also a way to expand the US imperialist project. So to get into the post-election era, and I don't know where to start this mess, is around Jeff Sessions and the Department of Justice, ICE, the DHS implementation memos, or the Muslim ban. At the AAAN, we made it clear since day one that the Muslim ban is not the only dangerous policy here. The implementation memos would have impacted a lot more people than the Muslim ban. So our first instinct was to build a broad response team, not only to the Muslim ban, but to all the struggles that we're facing post this election. And this platform targeted mainly, or gave space mainly to Asian folk, African folk, Latinx folk, Black, labor, and other communities to address not only discuss their resistance, but also a platform to talk and project their work and how we could unite the forces and continue to move forward. And this decision was not just tactical. It was a strategic decision. The AAAN and USPCN, both organizations that I'm a member of, are the main Arab organizations that work in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives and the immigrant rights forces in Chicago. And also AAAN sits on the steering committee of the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And for folks that know the Alliance, they have their historic. It was mentioned in the first hold on the ban that the chaos at airports influenced the decision of the courts. So the first step was, let's raise this chaos, let's raise our voices, let's take it to the streets, let's shut it down, interrupt business as usual, and then everything is going to flow from there. So post the Muslim ban, we recognize the need to educate the community about their rights. So on the table outside, I put some of the cards that we have, the Know Your Rights cards. I have plenty more. So on the cards, it basically told folks their rights. It's in Arabic and in English. So we did these Know Your Rights workshops, and we told our community members that all you have to do is cut the bottom of this card, hand it to the FBI agent, because we don't talk to the FBI. In Chicago, we have a rule. The FBI knocks on your door, you keep your mouth shut, and by the way, you call Jim Fennedy. So you have Jim Fennedy on speed dial, and then you keep your mouth shut. So we try to kind of bring that to the community and continue to educate the community, continue to mobilize. When we talk about continue mobilizing, we have to also recognize that this administration emboldens white supremacists and groups like the KKK to march in hundreds and thousands. We've seen that in Virginia. So in Chicago, we have a trustee, Sharon Branigan, which also, this is a campaign that we're leading, the AAAN and the campaign to take on aid. And we're asking for the resignation of Sharon Branigan. She made some anti-immigrant comments all over Facebook for political gain, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Black, Latinx comments. And we said that we will not allow that in our community, where 30% of the residents are of Arab or Muslim descent. So what has that organizing been looking like? Once again, no business as usual. So over the past 4 months, we've been shutting down the Palos Township meetings. So we're going in, we're packing the room, and through direct action, we're shutting down the meetings, and we're just making it ungovernable in that township. So whether we're calling, our call-in days, every day in this township is getting hundreds of phone calls. Open Meeting Act violations, those are being submitted to Lisa Madigan, Attorney General's office. Pressure through the media. But mainly the organizing that we're doing on the street, packing those meetings, rallying and protesting. And we're using those kind of meetings to lay the groundwork that racists don't have the right to speak. So every time we line our community members to speak, then a couple racists that support Sharon Brandon and her message try to speak, we automatically end those meetings and shut them down. Just to conclude here and wrap it up, just a question that I'm going to throw out there and kind of answer my own question. Trump won't be president forever, so what should we do after the presidency? The resistance did not begin with Trump or his election, and it will not stop after he's out of office. We must continue to resist, continue to organize, until we liberate all our people. So how do we do that? The way to resist racism and destroy white supremacy is to unite the two most strategic allies in the U.S. The first strategic ally is the oppressed nationalities. So we're talking about the Black Liberation Movement, the Chicano Liberation Movement. And the second strategic ally is the huge multinational working class in this country. So uniting the workers and the oppressed people is the way to make real systemic change in this society, to transform this society as well, to transform our political realities in this country, and to establish a system that will lead to equality, justice for all people, not just a selected few. And thank you all so much.
Thank you for that amazing speech. Our next speaker is going to be Christine Hernandez, the Vice President of North Texas Dream Team and the co-chair of North Texas chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. When she's not organizing in the streets, she works full-time as a human resource professional. Can you hear her?
All right, can everyone hear me in the back? Just want to make sure I'm projecting because I have that issue. Yeah, I echo that sentiment. I got in really late last night because LAX is a nightmare, and we drove over here with Virginia. She was my partner in crime getting here. So yes, my name is Christian Hernandez. I am the Vice President of the North Texas Dream Team. We are a grassroots, youth-led, now recently nonprofit because we realized we kind of need money to do some stuff. But primarily funded by small donations, funded by the people that were, the people we're serving, the people we're working with, and the people we're working for. I did write some stuff down because otherwise I'll go off into tangents, and I don't think we all have time for that. So the motto for NTDT, as we like to call it, is hearts, hands, and minds working for a better future. We are documented, we are undocumented, we are children of immigrants, and we're young and old. Despite us saying that we're youth-led, we do have our older members letting the younger members take lead and understanding themselves as leaders and understanding the work that they're capable of. I was invited here to speak on my experiences fighting the current administration in my home state. Texas is home to roughly 1.5 million undocumented people, second only to California, and our state houses about 35% of overall DACA recipients. These numbers can be overwhelming to anyone trying to fight the white supremacist agenda, let alone doing so alongside communities with very few protections. Our team was formed right at the height of the Dreamer movement when undocumented and unafraid rang loud in the streets and direct action was bold and unified. We were at the forefront of the fight for deferred action and in North Texas launched ourselves into providing free DACA workshops run entirely by volunteers, a network of attorneys doing pro bono work, and a commitment to ensuring this work would empower those we were serving. We did this by having applicants fill out their own applications. It seems small, but in actuality, we were reminding people of their agency. We were ensuring that our role in this work got smaller and smaller. We were handing over the tools. With very little money, an entirely volunteer-run organization, and only in our free time, we were able to help 8,200 individuals, train 1,000 volunteers, and save approximately $1.6 million in legal fees.
our collaboration with DSA, which is a natural partnership given my role within DSA, we were also able to raise $21,000 for DACA renewals once the Trump administration announced the rescindment of DACA. If this story advocates for anything, let it be that small and determined actions by a few can make a big difference. Now, this fight has been ongoing, predating Trump, and attributed to the deportation machine set in motion by the deporter-in-chief himself. The criminalization of our communities was often overlooked by anyone not already in the movement. It was our first taste of being political pawns, of realizing that both parties were willing to compromise at the expense of our parents, always sacrificing brown bodies in the name of safety. Border security, felons not families, and secure communities forever changed the face of immigration work. Rhetoric was undermining the reality and inhumanity of deportations. It built the case against sanctuary and paved the way for the popularity of programs like 287G and legislation like SB4. This Show Me Your Papers law has been the focus of our organizing for the past 8 months. We were there at its inception during a Senate committee hearing, up until it was signed into law over Facebook Live by our governor. We were interrupting the Republican barbecues where Ken Paxton was talking about all the progress that he was making. We were there in 100-degree weather. We were there at protests at the Capitol where Representative Matt Rinaldi called ICE and threatened to put a bullet in the head of another representative. We were there at 3 o'clock in the morning in front of Governor Abbott's mansion protesting with mariachi music and showing him we weren't afraid to bring the fight to his front door. We were there with the quinceañeras who demonstrated that despite it all, we still held on to our roots and to the beauty of our culture. We held interfaith events with the Muslim community to remind ourselves and remind others that we weren't in it alone. And we were there celebrating when the injunction came down the day before SB4 was supposed to put into play. We were there pressuring our city councils to join the lawsuit against SB4. In Dallas specifically, which is where I live, we're constantly doing enough work that that morning we held a press conference and filled the the city council chamber, and by that afternoon we had joined the lawsuit. And we have been pressuring the city of Fort Worth, which is the last biggest city in Texas, to not join the lawsuit, and are currently interrupting any and all celebrations and making sure that they realize that they're not going to get any peace from us because they didn't join the lawsuit. Now, SB4 has struck fear into our communities. Its cold fingers have grasped at our own membership, reminding us that no one is safe when institutions like ICE can exist without accountability or transparency. We have worked tirelessly to inform and educate our communities about SB4, about their rights, about their power. We have done family preparedness workshops to make sure that people understand that there is always a possibility of deportation and that their children should be looked after, that their assets should be looked after, and that they do need to make preparations because we are living in dire times. But damn, are we tired. We're tired of NGOs working for quotas, not people, of leaders seeking glory, of leaders seeking glory, not understanding, of our elders saying our politics are too radical, policing our work and reinforcing the very oppressive systems we are fighting. Our fight is that much more overwhelming when you realize it's a two-front battle. But this fight is not impossible. When I'm asked what the answer is to a white supremacist agenda, to the Trump administration, I can confidently say it's you. The real resistance to Trump will be bold, it'll be young, it'll be queer, it'll be anti-capitalist. It will be found in the pages of Marx and the echoes of Angela Davis, in ourselves as the alternative. We must incorporate the intentional destruction of racist systems, legislation, and institutions, and build unity through that struggle. We must fight for liberation not merely in solidarity or as allies, but as accomplices, always bearing in mind that our liberation is tied to each other. We must create bridges as we destroy and dismantle the old institutions so we have something left to stand on. And we must embrace being uncomfortable, imperfect, and contradictory as we grow and learn from one another. We owe it to each other to pull our comrades away from despair and remind them of why this fight is important. That is how we build against Trump's agenda. By building ourselves and each other up, by sharing skills, building relationships, and always keeping in mind that a better world is already possible. In an era where we are organizing against reactionism, we will need to organize with purpose and vision to be effective. We have a world to win, and it will be done by the people in this very room. Thank
Thank you again for our last speaker. Our next one is Skylar Dar from SDS at the University of Minnesota. He'll be speaking on their experience with organizing against racists in Minnesota and the need to build a movement.
All right. So, last March 4th, racists were coming to our city and we needed to act. Like progressives across the country, we were confronted with the March 4th Trump movement. SDS at the University of Minnesota was confronted with the question, how to respond. The march itself was a logistical nightmare and presented a lot of challenges. One, it wasn't on our campus. It was at the state capitol in St. Paul. Two, it was a location that many of us were not familiar with. Three, it was a place where arrests would be particularly harsh because it's federal property. And on top of all of that, maybe the worst of all, four, it's, I guess, illegal to buy and drop a bunch of locusts on people. But we rallied against racism and reaction anyway. So why did we do it? What was our strategy? And how was it effective? Going into the event, we had several other victories and lessons from previous actions to build off of and learn from. So, for example, in 2015, our SDS led the second protest of alt-right troll Milo Yiannopoulos at a university campus, shouting "Ye Yiannopoulos out of Minneapolis" and "Trans Lives Matter." And by the way, that was before Davis. Y'all did great though. This was following cases of Milo Yiannopoulos calling out trans students at his speaking engagements. The women who had protested him just previous to us at a different university received death threats. It's obvious now, and especially to all of us in this room, but these examples of so-called free speech were really just examples of hate speech giving a call to action. We knew that any reactionary, violent call to action by racists must be met with an equally passionate call to action against them. That call to action brought out roughly 100 or 200 people and got the entire section of our campus around the speaking engagement locked down. But despite that lockdown, we snuck roughly 30 students and community members into the University of Minnesota tunnel system and led them in a shouting confrontation with the police who kept us from entering Milo's event. This was no small action, and it showed people's eagerness to confront and stamp out racism on our campus. But that was before Trump was elected. As many of us know, interest in SDS surged going into these new political conditions, and the same was no less true on our campus. Working in coalition with anti-racist forces throughout the Twin Cities, we led 500 students in a feeder march against Trump on Inauguration Day, January 20th, and met with a citywide march of roughly 6,000 people. Yes. But what did these marches achieve, and what did they teach us going into our March 4th rally, when we were in direct confrontation with racist Trump supporters? We built a movement. 6,000 people weren't moved. 6,000 people weren't moved in a day. They were struggled with and reached out to over a period of months. We knew building a strong activist organization and a robust network of groups in coalition with us was necessary to not only build that resistance on January 20th, but to create a sustained movement against racism and to oppose imperialism's every blow. We brought these lessons with us on March 4th, but despite our numbers, on January 20th, we only had a third of their numbers on March 4th, if that. But numbers don't make the action. Hard work, strategy, and tactics are what make the action. Entering the central rotunda of the inside of the Minnesota State Capitol, we were immediately surrounded. Pushed, shoved, punched, even strangled, we stood our ground, defended ourselves, and we dared to win. We took control of the stairs behind us, held control of the second floor, and we, along with our allied groups, unveiled a banner reading, "Y'all racist." We shouted and yelled and made so much noise that next to nothing could be heard from the stage for their entire hour-long rally. As soon as we chose to leave, so did the racists. They had nothing else to rally behind. Even with fewer numbers, we had the tactics and we put in the work. With the strategy to win as many as we can to building the movement against racism, Trump and his ilk have no chance. Through struggle, we learned 1, it's important to engage as many people as possible in fighting the right wherever it manifests. 2, it's to develop a clear purpose for the event through intentional strategy and work to forge long-running victories in campaigns rather than just setting a standard for one-off actions. We learned to dare to struggle and to dare to win. Dare to struggle, dare to win! Dare to struggle, dare to win! Dare to struggle, dare to win!
Dare to struggle!
Dare to win!
Getting professional.
Oh, we
This is so cool. You guys hear me? You guys hear me?
Yes.
Y'all want to try chanting with this phone?
Yes.
I love chanting. Anyone? Okay. So my favorite chant is, you guys ready for this? I don't think you're ready. I'm not hearing that you're ready. Is ready? Okay, so. Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Say what? Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Say what? Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Say what? Ain't no power like the power of the people, cause the power of the people don't stop. Say what? Thank you for our last speaker. That was a pretty good speech. I'm going to introduce our next speaker is Dexter Hector from the University of California, Davis. He and his fellow organizers were the first campus to shut down a speaking event by Milo.
Malalalala.
This is a notorious white nationalist speaker who came to spread hate speech against undocumented people. Can we hear it for Dexter Hector and the rest of UC Davis?
Thank you. For those of you who aren't familiar with Milo Yiannopoulos, he got his popularity through the Gamergate movement, which was a movement to push women and feminism out of gaming culture. He has significantly increased his popularity since his introduction into Breitbart. He was an editor for Breitbart for a long time before he was fired for being a pedophile, surprisingly. Wow, wouldn't think it, huh? Now he's moved on to attacking social justice basically everywhere it arises. He's referred to BLM as a terrorist organization. He supports the forced removal of Muslims, and he uses his fetishization of black bodies to justify that racism. He says that like his identity as a gay man is justification for the removal of rights for LGBTQ people, and he uses that identity to combat the kind of identity politics that have become so prevalent in liberal politics. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge kind of the limitations that identity politics can have, but also why it's so important. So first of all, I want to say that SDS Davis did not organize this alone. This was a huge coalition movement. We got Students and Workers Ending Racial Violence, which is the kind of pseudo Black Lives Matter group on our campus. They put in a lot of work. We also got support from BLM, from various Antifa groups from across California. And all we got probably 400 or 500 people to show up and try to shut him down. Woo! So I'll get on to how we organize this. talk about why his rhetoric is so harmful. So he tries to justify his little marches and speeches through free speech. He says that the left has been censoring the right to free speech, and that they're basically the white people and the right nationalist movement are being silenced, which is good, honestly, because fascist rhetoric carries an inherently violent praxis to it. Milo he's doxed people, or he's revealed the identity of trans people within the very audience of his speech. He's called out people. He's at Berkeley. He was going to teach people how to report people that were suspected of being undocumented. So his speeches do carry this inherently violent rhetoric that is being used, and he uses his supporters to do that rather than doing it himself. In doing that, he's able to dodge a lot of this accusation. But it's important to recognize that calling people to action to commit violence is violence. That's something a lot of scientists don't realize. So, working alongside BLM and Students and Workers Ending Racial Violence, we were a coalition primarily composed of queer and black students, which was incredibly important, I think, in protesting someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, who uses identity politics so frequently to combat social justice movements. Because identity politics has a lot of flaws to it when it's not tied into more intersectional movements. So he uses hate speech to mobilize his supporters, and he has changed his position a lot, but most recently he supported Trump right after Ted Cruz, which doesn't make a lot of sense. He's obviously doing it for power, but still, he's been credited, and he met with Donald Trump personally with a lot of the popularity boost of Donald Trump. So I want to go on to why working in a coalition is so important. First of all, it allows a diversity of tactics, which I think is what ultimately led to our protest being so successful. Allowing people to specialize in different tactics if they choose. Some people aren't necessarily able to put their bodies on the line. Some people can't do public speaking. Some people are good behind the doing organizational work and getting legal support. So I think acknowledging that and being able to build a coalition of many different groups that can each have their own specialty is extremely important, and that's and also playing off of the history of your campus. UC Davis has a long history of student activism. If y'all haven't seen the pepper spray incident, that was a big thing. Peaceful protesters were sitting down and were pepper sprayed for being violent. So the administration at UC Davis has been very lax in the last few years because that was a nightmare. And they were planning on doubling our tuition that same year. So the night that the pepper spray happened, and there was so much negative press, kept our tuition low for a little bit, even though it's rising still. So the University of Davis is being very careful to keep their reputation intact right now. And I think that's not something that happens in a lot of other campuses. It's something that was very unique to us, and it's probably why our protest was so successful. But I encourage everyone, if y'all have to organize at any point, to look into the history of where you're from and learn how you can use that to your advantage. So lastly, I wanted to talk about why these Antifa movements of shutting down fascist speakers have become so big, and why the state of Florida just declared a state of emergency for Richard Spencer. They're spending millions of dollars protecting these fascist speakers. Millions of dollars. Milo Yiannopoulos had a free speech week at UC Berkeley recently. It was canceled because there was so much opposition, but UC Berkeley spent $800,000 to let him walk through campus for 15 minutes. They paid for so much security that could have been going towards helping pay for students' tuition, for instance, especially people, undocumented people. It really shows how important it is for the students to have power in the university rather than corporate powers that is becoming more prevalent. Neoliberalism and its involvement in the university is probably the root cause of all of these issues, because it's prioritizing profits over the safety and well-being of students. So it's important for us to stand up, to fight back. So join me, raise your hand, make a fist. We the people will resist. Raise your hand, make a fist. We the people will resist. Raise your hand, make a fist. We the people will resist.
Raise your hand, make a fist.
We the people will resist.
Raise your hand, make a fist.
Thank you for your speech. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Zusiski. He's been active in Japanese American community in South Bay for almost 30 years with the National Outreach Committee. In February of 2017, he gave the keynote speech as the annual Day of Remembrance event, which commemorates the World War II concentration camps for Japanese Americans. Mr. Zusiski will also lead an organizer for a Japanese American Muslim March and Rally in San Jose in March of 2017.
Sorry, after the introduction, I got...
Should I use this?
Or yeah.
Use it. After the introduction, I was like clapping, going, yeah, Professor. Oh, wait a moment. That's it.
So anyway, on behalf of the Neo-Machi Outreach Committee of San Jose, I wanted to thank all of you, and in particular the Students for Democratic Society and the Student Action Network of UC Santa Barbara for inviting me here to speak today. The Neo-Machi Outreach Committee, or we like to call it NOC, it's easier to pronounce, is a all-volunteer grassroots community group in San Jose, Japantown, originally formed to fight the redevelopment and destruction of the community, and then grew and formed and still continue to fight around the issue of the World War II concentration camps for Japanese Americans. What I wanted to talk about today was a little bit about the issue of history and the struggle for justice, because 7 years ago, 7 years and a little less than 1 month ago, on September 24th, 2010, FBI agent showed up at my door at 7 a.m. in the morning. And I had no idea what he wanted, but I knew what to do, and that's what the brother Bassam mentioned, is you don't talk to him. So he kept trying to get me to say something. I said, I don't want to talk to you, don't want to talk to you. And then, just to make it clear that they knew everything about me, on my way to work, the FBI called me in my car, and I was actually talking to my union vice president, who had been visited in her youth. Her family had been, her parents were activists by the FBI. And then it's like, I'm like, who's this? And they're like, this is like 7:15 in the morning. And they're like, oh, hi, this is so-and-so from the FBI. Do you have time to talk now? And I'm like, no, and hang up, and then we call back. So anyway, they just want to make it clear that they know everything. But the reason why I knew what to do and that I wasn't afraid was because of both work that community organizers had done, and then my own family's experience and my own community's experience with the FBI. Because in the day after Pearl Harbor, December 7th and 8th, 1941, the FBI and other government agents went around and arrested 2,000 Japanese immigrants. These were not people who committed any crimes, but they were basically all the church leaders, all the business leaders, all the community group leaders, even down to flower arranging teachers and dance teachers were rounded up and sent to special Department of Justice camps. This was followed a few months later by a roundup of the whole entire community. Over 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent ended up in concentration camps due to World War II. But despite the fact that basically the entire leadership of the community, or the traditional leadership, I should say, of the community, had been rounded up months earlier and sent to separate prison camps, Japanese Americans stood up and fought back. Thousands of people in the concentration camps refused to swear loyalty to the U.S. government and ended up in a special segregation camp in Tule Lake in California. Hundreds of young men, the largest single mass organized draft resistance, did swear loyalty but said, no, we're not going into the military when our families are locked up in camps and denied their rights. And a few individuals, including Fred Korematsu, you may have heard of him from here in California, totally refused to go to camp and then were arrested, convicted, and jailed. Now, 30 years after the camps, but actually now it's almost 40 years ago, inspired by the struggle of African Americans in the 1960s, Japanese Americans stood up and raised the demand for redress, or monetary, redress, which is an official government apology, and reparation, a monetary compensation for going to camp. So this was an important movement because the children of the immigrants, the Nisei, and their children, my generation, the Sansei, joined together to fight for and win this battle. Now this came during the 1980s, a time of a move to the right, somewhat similar, given what was coming before, to what's happening right now with the Trump administration. Although now anybody who advocates Reagan's policies today, Trump would be attacking them as a liberal or socialist or something like that. But it was still a move to the right, but we were able to combine grassroots protest, a broad united front of Japanese American organization, and very importantly, rallying our allies among African Americans, Chicanos and Mexicanos, and progressive whites to win a victory after more than 10-year fight. And in fact, an official government commission decided at the end, in recommending for redress and reparations, that the concentration camps were not around national security, they're around war hysteria, racism, and a failure of political leadership. Now, those are exactly the words I would use today to describe the administration and the presidency of Donald Trump. War hysteria, racism, and a failure of political leadership. So when Trump announced his Muslim ban that not only included non-immigrants, but permanent residents and even dual citizens who had made from these 7 countries were being banned at the airports, Japanese Americans joined other nationalities in protest. We also, every year we do a commemoration of the executive order that put Japanese Americans into concentration camps. And just this year, basically our numbers tripled. We traditionally have 200 to 300 people, over 700 people came to our event. And given that kind of momentum, we decided to do a march and rally, which this is like the second time our community has marched for something in the last 30 or 40 years. And so we joined with American Muslims and we marched behind the banner 1972 to 2017, 75 years of resistance, no to the concentration camps, no to Islamophobia. Actually, I'm not keeping track of how long I've been up here, but I tend to. I'm a professor, so I tend to talk a lot. But I just wanted to say that in addition to learning from our history both of the oppression and of the resistance, and of the hope and of the knowledge of how to organize in our fight, we also need to look towards the future. Because for Asian Americans in particular, I think there's not only the threat of the Islamophobia of the Trump administration. In San Jose, the vast majority of Muslims are actually Asians. And so there's sort of an overlap there. But also the U.S. Threats against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Trump's constant warmongering there, increases the danger in case of a war. Of course, a war would be a terrible thing, in particular for the people of Korea, but also for the people of the world. But it's also going to unleash anti-Asian sentiment like we've never seen. Because believe it, people who are racist, the Milo types and Nick Spencer types, they don't know and they don't care the difference between a Korean, a North Korean, South Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino. They don't know, they don't care, and they will come after us. Last thing I just want to mention is a lot of times I know among Asian Americans there's sort of a tension of what does it mean to be Asian American, and it was interesting listening to the brother from Davis talk about some of the limits of identity politics, because I think Asian American identity is a very important thing, but it's not enough just to be, oh yes, I am Asian, I can identify with the culture and history and traditions in Asia. But I think the American part is also very important. And I like, there's a particular quote from a famous, well, he should be famous, he was famous among people who read his work, famous Filipino-American writer and activist, Carlos Bulosan, who wrote a short story called Being American. And in that story, these stories are fiction, but they're based on his experience and the experiences of thousands of Filipino immigrants in the early part of the 20th century, was about his cousin Consorcio and how he became an American. And what Carlos Bulosan said is that Consorcio became American not when he learned to speak English, not when he became a U.S. citizen, but when he took up the struggle to defend the rights of Filipinos and all workers. And that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you to all the speakers. Now we're gonna have every single speaker that just spoke coming back to the stage.
All of the speakers on the plenary to sit on the seats.
Yeah. So we're gonna take audience questions that we have for anyone.
Yeah.
Are there enough seats?
I feel like such a mom.
And then you can address your questions to a specific speaker, or you can address it to the entire plenary, and then the speakers can kind of jump in to answer the question. But yeah, we'll try to do, we'll do 10 to 15 minutes actually. Less than an hour or so.
Okay. So just raise your hands if you have any questions.
And then pass them to those who are
Any questions?
This guy.
What was your name?
Tom,
Tom.
this is for the whole panel. How do you move and mobilize centrists? What are your ideas or your experiences on getting those people to participate? Thank you.
So I think at the end of the So I think at the end of the day, I mean, STS ultimately is a multi-tenancy organization. We have people from all sorts of walks of politics, and ultimately that doesn't necessarily mean that someone who's a centrist doesn't also agree that something that Trump did was bad. And ultimately, what unites us as STSers and STS affiliates and other activists is ultimately a dedication to activism, to action, to building a movement. And ultimately, if centrists are affected by that movement, they will come out to your actions. If they are interested in fighting Trump, they might be interested to come to your actions. So ultimately, you can build them through that. I mean, there has to be a starting point. You can't just immediately start like, well, why do you believe in this? You can't, you can't just start berating people. You have to really build with them. You have to work with them and pull them in closer. over time, you know?
I'd say what we're intentionally doing is going to their meetings. We've been asked to do presentations on like immigration, and never doing those presentations with the fear of like offending. I mean, I constantly refer to Obama as the reporter in chief, and they like cringe when I do that. But a lot of them are also like afraid of being. I mean, it's I guess it's that weird like where that identity politics kind of works, because they're afraid of being racist, since a lot of these groups are primarily white, and so they're like, okay, I guess she can say that. But like understanding that, and kind of, I think it has to be intentional and it has to be proactive with controlling the narrative, because a lot of, I say two-front battle because a lot of these centrists tend to attribute everything to Trump. And in Texas, like Trump, yeah, is this like haunting presence, but we have Abbott, we have Paxton, we have ICE, I mean, we have the democratically controlled sheriff's office. And so, I mean, it's a matter of us making them understand that Trump is not the root of this, that this started before Trump, because what we don't want is to invest time in getting them to understand like why deportations are bad for everyone, why ICE is always bad, and then, you know, having a new president come on and everyone goes to brunch and goes along their merry way. Like, we want to make sure that we're building, and we're doing so intentionally. Otherwise, there's not really a point in like investing that time and energy in it.
Yeah, I would say one thing. It's important to distinguish between sort of people at the grassroots and sort of leaders, because they both may take what may be centrist positions, but I think it's very different. So, for example, I mean, take my wife, all right. I wouldn't actually call her a centrist, you know. She's very progressive. That's how we met. We were both involved in the Neo-Machi Outreach Committee, and she's very much against racism and national oppression, but she's not a socialist or communist or an anarchist. She doesn't have that strong an understanding of the importance of the labor movement or the anti-war movement, things like that. And so for people like that, I think a lot of it is learning through their own experience. Right, the experience of both being active in the struggle and then seeing what happens, you know, around them in society. Because I mean, she knows I'm a socialist, and you know, and she's open to that, and she's not anti-communist, because that would be
awkward.
Sort of off. Yeah. Talk about strange bedfellows, but that's going too far. But she's not either pro either, and it was just interesting. I remember in the aftermath of the whole, you know, financial and economic crisis, I was making some comments about, I can't remember exactly what, unemployment or workers getting laid off or whatever, and she unfortunately lost her long-term, you know, permanent job and was never able to find a permanent full-time job in her field, and went through like 5 years of part-time, temporary, you know, getting laid off over and over again before finally just deciding to retire. And I was just talking to her about something, and then she was like, yeah, capitalism sure sucks, doesn't it? My goodness. So, you know, but that was through her own experience. The other thing, though, I think for many leaders, if they're centrist, you have to look at what is their, sort of what are their interests and what's influencing them. And because sometimes it's hard to tell, are they centrist because that's what they actually believe? Because some people really have these sort of liberal ideas about society, and they're sort of committed liberals because they believe in it, you know. Others are actually do it because they're opportunists, you know. They're always sort of trying to calculate, well, I don't want to be that radical, but, you know, sort of how to keep your foot in both camps. And those people can be good or bad, because sometimes they'll do things because it's in their interest, but sometimes they're hard to trust. And then some people are actually good people, but there's more conservative forces pulling on them. Like we have one reverend in our community who was actually very progressive. He had been in or around the movement when he was younger. And he was actually I wanted to do a program about the Holy Land Five, which were five, I think they were they from Texas? Yeah. Palestinian Americans. And the Holy Land Foundation was one of the largest Muslim foundations in the United States. And they were basically framed up, convicted by the government, and they had done a event at the local Islamic Center, and I was hoping to get a similar event done where they had a speaker, a very prominent Japanese American speaker, the daughter of Fred Korematsu, Karen Korematsu, spoke, and I was hoping to get a similar thing in the Japanese American community. When I talked with the Reverend, he was very open to it, very interested. But he says, but I'm running into some problems with my board, so can we all have a meeting? And then I went, and I didn't actually know who his board was, but actually once I got there, I knew some of them, and through the discussion, I knew more of them. And basically, they were all like business people, managers, professionals. I mean, one of the reasons a lot of people are put on church boards or other nonprofit boards is for fundraising, right? So you want people with ties to money, and they were like, oh my God, I mean, but I don't want to say that because it was in a Christian church, but they were really, you could tell, uptight about it, and I was like, okay, this isn't going to fly. So I mean, so I just want to make the distinction for the grassroots people you work with. You got to win them over through their own experience and practice. For the others, you can do the best you can, and try and distinguish between those who are committed centrists, opportunists, and those who are just, they're actually better, but they have conservatives leaning on them and on their job in particular. Sorry.
There's not much to add on my end, other than it is our duty to struggle with the centrists within our communities, bring these people close to us and develop these people. So I agree with the professor 100% on that.
What was your name?
Regina.
Regina. That's my sister's name.
Oh, awesome. She was really great. So I was going to FSU, which is a predominantly like white institution, and there's been times where we've had rallies that are like geared towards like Black Lives Matter and things like that, and then like a lot of the people are like white, and I've had like one white woman come up to me and be like, you need to bring more Black people here, which was like weird. So I guess my question is like, how do you like try to like bring more oppressed nationalities into like the movement, and even if it's like for things that aren't directly like related to that, like if it's like tuition equity, or if you're an African American person, like how to get someone to come to like a rally for like tuition equity, like actually like building like that base. And if you have any advice for being on a predominantly white institution, that would also be great too.
I was like, welcome to my life. So, I mean, obviously with the North Texas Dream Team, the majority of us are, most of us actually are from Mexico, or like have parents that are from Mexico. But with my experiences with DSA locally, I am one of the few people there that comes from like a Latino background. And one of the few, actually I'm not the only person that speaks Spanish. There are a lot of white people in my chapter that speak Spanish, which is great. But there does seem to be somewhat of a burden of like, hey, how do we diversify without tokenizing type of situation? And so a lot of that has been built through solidarity work with specifically like Latino issues. And so that's why the partnership is kind of like a very natural partnership locally. And so, and that's constantly what I get from like the Dream Team members, like, yeah, DSA is always there, like they always show up. Even when we have an action where it's like 20 people, we can guarantee that like 5 of them are at least from DSA. And so that exposure to those ideas, the exposure to showing up, to understanding that struggle, I think was what has gotten a lot of crossover from that membership, the Dream Team membership to DSA actually. A lot of them have come over and joined. And so I think a lot of it is not necessarily, I guess going back to it, it's like not necessarily looking out to, not having that burden fall on people from that community, because that's not fair. But also identifying barriers to why people aren't involved in that, making sure meetings are accessible via public transportation, providing child watch, and making sure that doesn't fall on like the women of the group to do that. And so I think a lot of it's just like being a lot more out of the box type of thinking, a lot beyond like the typical activist circles, and trying to remove as many barriers as possible to get people to be there, and then understanding that if it's not, then it's something that you work towards. It doesn't have to be like we have to diversify right now, but just understanding that that intentionality is always going to be in the back of your mind.
I think another thing is, as STSers, oftentimes, I mean, at least on my campus, and our chapter is admittedly, unfortunately, majority white, which we don't want it to be, right? We want to build with more communities of color on our campus. And a lot of times we're seen on campus as like, that's that white activist group, which obviously we don't want to be either. And that's not even only happening just to STS chapters that are majority white. It's happening with STS chapters that aren't majority white. So it's like, how do you fight that? How do you contradict that? And ultimately, I think there's two main things that we need to do, because we have to look at it as a campaign, right? I mean, not just the main campaign, but attaching it to our main campaigns. Like, we're fighting for the rights of communities of color on our campus. And ultimately, you have to build coalition, but you also have to have actions, right? And I think the main thing is that you have to build coalition with student groups on campus that are for those oppressed nationalities and for those students of color groups. So, like, for example, we build a lot with La Raza on campus, which is our student cultural center for Chicano youth, as well as working with SJP, so Students for Justice in Palestine, where they're not necessarily geared to do activism, but they'd be open to it, and we can work with them as the activist group on campus. But the other thing is, a lot of times, people become really bogged down with, we have to build coalition. Like, if I want to fight for affirmative action, if I want to fight for more protections for undocumented students on my campus, I have to build a coalition. I can't do any work until we build a coalition, until we bring everybody to the table. Everybody has to be at the table before we can do anything. And I think that also has to be struggled with, because at the end of the day, we have to have an action. And ultimately, having an action is what is going to bring those people to the table, because people come to whoever is doing the work. If you're showing that ultimately, at the end of the day, you're the student group that is fighting for these students on campus and fighting for these people in our communities, they're going to come. And you really have to, balance those two things, both coalition building and just doing the work.
I think it's important to acknowledge that people of color are also oftentimes a lot more busy than white people, and using our privilege and like the fact that we have extra time, we might have extra funds, we're not attacked and like we're not scared to go out. We can use that to help them in their causes. So for the white people in STS Davis, we make sure to always try to reach out to people and make sure that we have their support before we go ahead and like push for these campaigns. But at the same time, we do push for these campaigns, and we make sure that we're putting in the labor and we're not pushing too much of that onto people of color, and making that a burden on them.
Why need a mic?
Do what you want.
Okay, so I know this was a question targeted towards campuses, but I also want to talk about the work of the AAAN and the Arab Women Committee. Mm-hmm. This has been a project of Rasmia Ode, our former associate director, who was just deported on the 19th of September. So over the past 10 years, she built a committee of 800 immigrant women. Newly immigrants, I would say the vast majority did not speak any word of English. A lot of these folks did not read or write. And over the past 10 years, her job was to develop these women, not just in a way to integrate with American society, but to also to integrate politically, and to recognize that the struggle of the immigrant woman is connected to many other struggles. So with our partnership with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which is the main sort of Black Arab solidarity work that's happening in the city of Chicago, recognize that the immigrant women of the AAAN are always there. They show up and they hold space with the Chicago Alliance. And the Chicago Alliance is always there holding space with the immigrant women. We marched together around the Black Friday boycotts. So another Black Friday boycott is coming up. It's like remembrance for Laquan McDonald. And you would see that the Arab contingent is going to be led by the immigrant women of Rasmia's committee. So I think just the political education is key, that the struggles are connected, and then the idea that Black liberation will lead to liberation for all, and just factor that idea and then try to connect these dots. Because if we don't connect the dots and educate our folks, it's going to be hard to just mobilize and kind of like to continue to activate folks, but to continue to educate folks. And I think that would be key on campuses as well too.
as an Asian activist in the U.S. in general?
I'm sorry, could you?
What is the biggest struggle that you're facing as an Asian activist in general in the U.S. or just in general?
Are you more asking like, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing Asian American communities, or what is more? I mean, the way you
yeah.
worded it was for me, but I'm not sure. I'm not that representative of Asian. It's a tough question. I'm not sure that there's a single major one, because one of the things while Asian Americans have things in common, and there is a growing number of people who are actually more, like my daughter is more Asian than, definitely more Asian than Japanese American. But in general, the different communities have different issues: Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, Vietnamese, and other South Asians and others. And so, so for example, I said that the majority of the Muslims in my area are South Asian, Indian, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And I'm not sure what the proportion of South Asians in my area are Muslim, but that is a big issue. Whereas for most other, for East Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, I mean, it's important, it's something important, but it's one more of solidarity and trying to understand how that, anti-Muslim sentiment is really tied in with the anti-immigrant and the warmongering that's going on. And it's the same thing with immigration is a big issue. There's a lot of, in fact, it's about 15% of the undocumented today are Asian, and it's growing. And actually, for different reasons, the percentage of Mexican undocumented is going down, the percentage. But, in the Japanese American community, we really have to start at square one, because the number of Japanese immigrants is very small, and it's just, there's a tendency to see it as somebody else's issue, or in fact, you hear things like, oh, I of course support immigration, but they should come legally like we did. And, I'm sure people hear that among, even sort of, maybe, I'm not sure that makes you centrist or whatever, but I think there's two things. Then you have to point out that the undocumented are really just sort of the opening wedge for these people, because there's the RAISE Act, right, that the Republicans have sponsored, that wants to cut legal immigration in half and basically eliminate family reunification. So making that link, and then also educating people that a lot of Chinese and Japanese and even others today, but a lot of us didn't come legally. Like my grandfather didn't come legally. He jumped off a boat in San Francisco and swam in and got documents, and by the time they figured out he was missing, he was down in LA. So that isn't talked about among Japanese Americans. It's sort of part of that model minority. We have to do that. And then among Chinese Americans, I think the whole U.S. military move into Asia is very much I don't know how many people are aware of it or think about it, but it could be a big problem. And to me, there's this very scary or funny thing of these Chinese Americans in sort of the national security apparatus who are being targeted and framed, and usually there's some kind of fight back so they don't get totally screwed. But it started with Wen Ho Lee, right, who's actually from Taiwan, and they tried to convict him of being a Chinese, spy for the People's Republic of China. There was Captain James Yi, who was an army chaplain, and they were trying to, he was Muslim, and they were trying to convict him that somehow he was aiding and abetting the Muslim prisoners at Guantanamo. And then, actually, it's sort of weird. My second cousin was an FBI agent, and then they had a falling out, and then they tried to charge her with aiding and abetting a Chinese spy, even though they never really identified who that spy was. But it's just, to me, it's not a large number, but they're all in the national security thing. And then there's current cases of mainly Chinese American professors who are being targeted for harassment. There's she's a I can't even remember, I should remember, she studies water, hydrolysis,
Hydrolysis when you remove your hair.
yeah. Hydrologist, I don't know. Is anyone here more in natural sciences can help me out? Not hydraulics, but it's some, anyway, she studies water, and she's from China originally, and her, her classmate in college in China, who's now evidently or was vice minister of something in charge of dams, asked her, how do Americans pay for building dams, right? So she basically sent them, oh, look at these websites, da-da-da-da-da. And so the government went after her, trying to say that she was, you know, some kind of aiding and abetting Chinese spying for letting this guy know about how we pay for dams in, you know, in the United States. And so there's, so I think the whole issue of the, you know, Trump and the government's warmongering, and I really feel that while the main threats are right now aimed at the DPRK or North Korea, but it's part of a larger strategy for the U.S. to really try and contain and confront the rising power of China, and it's very dangerous, I think, for this country and for the world. Anyway, I better stop because I can go on.
Thank you very much, speakers. I think that concludes our plenary, and we're actually back on time. Round of applause for our speakers. Those were excellent presentations. I really learned a lot. I'm still learning a lot. I'm trying to kind of absorb everything you all said.
Good thing there's a live stream.
Yeah, and there's a live stream, so you can watch it again and again. But thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the convention as you view and attend workshops. But it's now 11:33, so we will begin. We'll break up to kind of begin our first workshop block. So if you look at the program, feel free to just mess with the binding to make sure you see the full numbers.